Decisions about energy are made at various levels. We make individual, community, national, and even international energy decisions. And the decisions that extend beyond the individual level, they often involve a formally established process of decision making, and that's what policy is all about. This is Unit 5, Energy Policy and Advocacy. After this unit, you should be able to describe how energy demand varies throughout the day, define the duck curve, explain how an energy-efficient smart grid can save energy and money, explain why a transition to a sustainable energy system is needed, and list ways an individual community member can influence energy policy. If you're watching this outside of California, I highly recommend that you do some independent research on the energy actors and the policies in your area. The California Energy Commission, or CEC, is responsible for advancing the state's clean energy goals. California has the highest energy efficiency standards in the country, and our energy regulations serve as a model for other states, often leading to change at the national level. How would you describe California's influence on national energy policy? California has strong influence on national energy policy, often setting trends that shape national policy. The California Energy Code is basically all the energy efficiency standards together, and it's an effective lever for reducing our energy consumption and the associated greenhouse gas emissions. The Energy Code applies to buildings and appliances and is updated every 3 years. The 2025 update expands energy efficiency requirements related to heat pumps, which provide energy-efficient heating and cooling, which will be increasingly important as the impacts of climate change continue to accelerate, ensuring that homes, particularly new builds, are equipped for electric appliances, improve ventilation standards to minimize the health impacts of indoor air pollution. Indoor air quality is usually much worse than air quality outdoors. The Energy Code also increases the requirement for solar and battery storage for new buildings. Remember from Unit 4 that CAISO, or the California Independent Systems Operator, manages electricity across transmission lines. They operate a wholesale energy market, and they oversee transmission planning. Every energy decision has an environmental impact, either positive or negative. And these requirements are meant to lessen the stress on the grid and reduce California's reliance on fossil energy sources, which has clear environmental benefits. In Unit 4, we were introduced to the demand curve, which is what we see here. For several decades, demand for electricity followed this predictable daily curve. This made it possible for utilities to easily predict the demand and meet it. We know from looking at the energy flow charts that in California, this demand is met mostly by gas-fired power plants plus some nuclear. And gas and nuclear are predictable energy sources. They're pretty much always available. And once these plants are powered up, they just chug along. But it's not easy or quick to get them up and running. So utilities would prefer less variation, so there's less starting and stopping of the power plants. In recent years, a lot of solar and wind has been added to the grid. This changes the demand and the shape of the curve, which changes the need for those fossil energy sources. So as we know, solar power generation happens in the middle of the day, and to CAISO, it looks like a reduction in demand. And this is because it is a reduction in demand from the power supplied by the grid. Because of solar power generation at many different places around the state, the grid operators don't have to supply the total demand anymore. They have to supply the total demand minus the solar generation, and power up when that solar generation is low, which happens when the sun goes down and people start coming home from work and school and powering on their TVs and stoves. Net electricity demand is a total demand minus what's met by renewables such as wind and solar. And it represents the electricity demand that has to be met by non-renewable sources like fossil fuels and nuclear after subtracting the contribution from renewables. Here we see the net demand in purple. We can see that it has a bulging belly in the middle of the day when there's a lot of solar generation, and a steep incline in the evening when the sun isn't shining. Some would argue that utilities don't really like this because they have to ramp up power plants to meet this demand. And doing this isn't efficient for them, and they don't make as much money as they otherwise would. How would you define net demand? It's a difference between total electricity demand and the demand that's met by renewable sources. It's the part that has to be met with fossil fuels or nuclear. When you add the wind and solar generation, which are the orange and dark blue lines, we can see how that solar generation is pushing the net demand down. The shape of the net demand kind of looks like a duck. The duck curve basically illustrates the effect that solar power generation has on demand for electricity. Some would argue that as more renewables get deployed, the utilities will see less revenue from their fossil sources, so they'll find ways to make it seem like this is a bad thing. What does a duck curve represent in energy demand and supply? It represents the drop in net electricity demand midday because of high solar generation, followed by a steep rise in the evening. So there are different programs that help CAISO manage the grid. Demand-side management refers to strategies and programs that encourage consumers to adjust their electricity use to improve grid efficiency, reduce costs, and support reliability. This could include shifting usage to off-peak times, reducing consumption, and using energy-efficient technologies. Demand-side management helps balance supply and demand, especially during peak periods. Demand response is when electricity users reduce or shift their power use during peak times in response to demand-side management. This also helps balance supply and demand on the grid. Demand response is an active approach to managing consumer demand for energy. If you're paying attention to your utility bill, you may have noticed time of use pricing, which is a form of demand-side management. Utilities charge different rates for energy at different times to try to encourage us to shift energy use to times when demand is low. I found this chart in tiny print on the 6th page of my bill, so this information isn't sent to every ratepayer as a refrigerator magnet or something that would be easy to reference. Instead, you kind of have to go searching for it. So there's summer pricing and winter pricing, and pricing for weekdays and weekends and holidays. Rates are highest during on-peak hours, lower during off-peak hours, and lowest during super off-peak hours. If we look back to the demand curve, we can see that on-peak hours are between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m., when people are home from work and school for the evening and the sun goes down. Utilities have to ramp up energy production during this time, and at least here in California, the energy is coming from fossil gas. One way to help manage demand is through smart grids. Smart grids are two-way communication systems between computers at the utility and customers' equipment and appliances. For example, people can get a discount or energy-efficient products if they let their utility adjust their air conditioner settings, or people can have their dishwasher or water heater shut down remotely to ease pressure on the grid during peak demand. These are called demand response events and can help avoid blackouts. Smart grids can save energy and money by reducing energy waste by detecting inefficiencies quickly, encouraging off-peak energy use to reduce reliance on fossil fuels, and helping consumers have more control over their energy use through apps and smart meters. How can an energy-efficient smart grid help save energy and money? Smart grids monitor and adjust energy flow, reducing waste and lowering costs. Smart grids also make it easier for customers to generate power for the grid through rooftop solar, for example. There's increasing pressure on the grid from a lot of different sources. One example is the increasing use of artificial intelligence and cryptocurrencies, and both of these mean that we need more and more energy-intensive data centers. What do you think contributes to increasing pressure on the electrical grid? Other pressures on the grid include more extreme weather events, increasing demand for heating and cooling, and electric vehicle charging, especially if many people charge at the same time. So modernizing the grid would make it less vulnerable to outages. Modernizing the grid could include technology that allows it to quickly adjust for major power losses in one area by automatically rerouting available electricity from other parts of the country. The electrical grid was designed over 140 years ago, and it's outdated and inefficient. So why haven't we updated it yet? Well, energy infrastructure has inertia. That's actually a really big problem. Inertia is the idea that anything in motion will stay in motion. So you may hear people say, well, we've never done it that way before. And while that doesn't sound like a good excuse, it's one that's being used a lot. The energy infrastructure we have today is a result of decisions of governments, corporations, and individuals. They've invested a lot of money and time and technology in the current system, which makes changing it really difficult. What do you think is the impact of energy infrastructure inertia? Changing the energy infrastructure will be challenging, but certainly not impossible. Think of it like slowing down an oil tanker, successfully navigating it in a new direction, then getting up to full speed again. It's not going to be easy, but the process has actually already started. So how do we accelerate this change? Effectively communicating what we demand is a key part of it. It's important that we communicate in ways that motivate people to act. We want to be convincing, and the best way to do that is to speak about your own experience. You're the expert on your life. If you're speaking to elected officials, let them know you're their constituent. Explain how their decisions impact your life, and use real-life examples. It can be useful to find a point of connection with them. As Dr. Catherine Hayhoe says, explain to them why they already care. Do they have kids? If so, explain to them that their kids, like yours maybe, deserve to meet their full potential and the barriers that the current system puts in their way. Try to focus on what we have to gain in a future where energy equity is a reality. What does it look like? Clean air, healthier communities, lower utility bills. There's so many benefits. According to many economists and scientists, regular people like you and I can accelerate the transition to clean energy by demanding our elected officials take action in this direction. We should be using full-cost pricing to include the harmful health and environmental costs of using fossil fuels and all other energy sources in their market pricing. This would make it easier for consumers to make decisions about how our purchasing power either supports the current system or supports the clean energy transition. Fossil fuel subsidies hide the true impacts from us. Tax carbon emissions, which is done in over 40 countries. We could invest the tax revenue in research in new energy-efficient and renewable energy technology. Dramatically decrease, then eliminate government subsidies for fossil fuel industries. Even better, we can shift those subsidies to modernizing the grid to accommodate more electricity from renewable sources. And where does the majority of government funds come from? Individual income taxes make up the largest single source of government funding. Taxes on big corporations who have much higher incomes than most of us make up a much smaller proportion. We could establish a feed-in tariff system nationally to guarantee owners of wind farms, solar power plants, and home solar systems a price for energy they can feed back to the grid. This is being done in more than 50 countries around the world. Require a minimum percentage of energy comes from renewable sources. Already more than half of the states in the US do this, but it should be required nationally. In addition to increasing fuel efficiency standards for new vehicles, the people elected to represent us need to know we want them to advocate for investment in mass transit and active transit within our cities. Active transit includes infrastructure like bike lanes, car-free commercial zones, and other areas that encourage walking, biking, skating, scootering, all of these active forms of moving around. We also want our elected officials to advocate for and support rapid transit or high-speed rail between cities. This is common in other countries, and we deserve it too. You may remember this from Unit 2, but it's worth repeating. Whether you're a high school student or college student, a working professional, retired, or none of the above, these are ways all of us can influence energy policy as concerned individuals. Become informed on the issues. And you're doing that now by taking this course. Make your views known at public hearings. Either go in person, call in, or post a comment online. Make your views known to elected representatives and understand their positions. Where do they stand? How do you align? Do you want to change their view? How can you convince them to do that? There's a link in the course overview to the Climate Action Now app and the 5 Calls app. Both of these provide easy ways to communicate directly with your representatives. Contribute time and/or money to candidates who support your views. Support the good guys. Help make their work easier. Vote. Vote with your vote and vote with your dollar. As you know, our money supports products and services whether we like it or not, so try to be intentional about where your money goes. Run for office. Again, not joking here. You should run for office, and I'm completely serious. Join a group pushing for change. There are many, many great organizations in San Diego and other locations around the world, and they're pushing for the future that we deserve. They're working in policy, in education, in direct action, and they're challenging the IOUs. There's really something for everyone. So join them. There's no need to try to do any of this on your own. And finally, support reform of election campaign financing that reduces undue influence by corporations and wealthy individuals. So corporations and wealthy individuals have a lot of political power, but only if we're not organized. If we're organized, there's many, many more of us than them, and then we gain the power. In this unit, we covered how energy demand and supply vary throughout the day. Demand tends to be highest in the mornings and evenings before and after the work and school day, and supply from renewables like wind and solar tend to be highest when people aren't at home. That's why we need storage through batteries and innovative technologies like bidirectional charging. Imagine using your house to charge your car, or your car to charge your house. We define the duck curve as the shape of the drop in net electricity demand in the middle of the day because of high solar generation. It's shaped like the belly of a duck. We talked about smart grids, which are two-way communication systems between utilities and customers' equipment and appliances. Smart grids help us be more responsive to changes in demand, identify inefficiencies, and ultimately save electricity and money. Throughout this entire course, not only in this unit, the focus has been on understanding the problems with the current system so we can all advocate for an energy system that's clean and equitable. Finally, we mentioned the many ways individuals like you and I can get involved in politics and influence energy policy to shape the future that we deserve. Throughout this course, we've seen that the current energy system is inefficient. It doesn't serve us all equitably, and it's a huge driver of climate change and other ecological and social problems. With over 80% of our energy coming from fossil fuels that are no longer cost-effective, this polluting system can only continue to operate with massive government subsidies to keep prices artificially low. The current system was created on the false idea that a finite supply of non-renewable coal, oil, and gas could be cheap and abundant forever. The world has shifted major energy sources before. We shifted from wood to coal, and then from coal to oil, and then to what we have now, which is dependence on coal, fossil gas, and oil. Each of these shifts has taken about 50 to 60 years and required huge investments in research, engineering, technology, and infrastructure. The clean energy transition will require improving energy efficiency and reducing energy waste. It'll require decreasing our dependence on non-renewable fossil fuels and instead relying more on a mix of local renewable energy sources from the sun, flowing water, wind, and even biomass and geothermal energy. As we as individuals make energy decisions, it's important to consider the costs and benefits of each decision. And as we've seen, some costs and benefits are much more obvious than others. Completing this Energy Equity 101 course is a really big step toward being able to make careful and informed systems-based energy decisions. Accelerating the transition to a clean energy economy that's equitable is going to take many actions from many actors. It's going to take all of us, and I'm so glad you're here. Thank you so much for being part of it.